You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. As you start to come to these places where you realize these things, then you have to be willing to get uncomfortable. You have to be willing to get uncomfortable holding that boundary and saying, I don't feel good doing this right now, but I know that it needs to become my new muscle memory. And maybe someday I won't struggle with it so much. I won't feel as uncomfortable because I've shown myself that I can do it. We have to accept the people around us for who they are, and we need to understand that we cannot change people. We cannot change other people, but we can control ourselves. Hello there, and thank you so much for joining me today for a new episode of the A Bit From Within podcast. My name is Felicia. I am a self-love and self-care specialist helping people every day to look at their lives in a different way and to remember that sometimes small changes inside can lead to big shifts in your life. I also help people understand that there are so many different ways that you can look at self-care, and that self-care is more than just treating yourself. It is the whole package. Sometimes it includes treating yourself. Sometimes it means giving yourself a break. Sometimes it means pushing yourself to do the things that you need to do. And oftentimes it's a big mix and a balance of all of those things. So if you are somebody who resonates with any of those topics, who needs a little bit more self-love, rejuvenation, and inspiration and encouragement in your life, I hope that you do subscribe to the A Bit From Within podcast wherever you're listening right now. Or of course, if you are a longtime listener or you're able and wanting to financially support my work here at A Bit From Within, I really encourage you to check out our Patreon page. If you are not familiar with Patreon, it is an awesome platform to support different creators' work, and it's actually where I share all of my live yoga classes, all of our replays of all of the yoga classes for the past 2 years, a huge library collection of guided meditations, and of course, for only $3 a month, you can listen to ad-free episodes of the podcast, as well as get our monthly lunar self-care guide, which has a new moon ritual, a full moon ritual, and tons of inspiration that can kind of hold space for you throughout the month. And it's a beautiful digital guide. If I do say so myself, I do design it personally and write everything in it. And so those are just some options to stay connected and to keep working on different ways to take care of yourself. Today, we're going to be talking about a wide array of topics. You know, for me personally, I come here on like my sacred day. It's Monday. It's my day to just devote my whole heart to this work and to not have to be as spread thin running around and doing things. And honestly, having Mondays as my sacred day has helped me in so many ways because it helps me kind of create a ritual around what I do. And I find myself every Sunday evening starting just to get so excited for Monday coming and the space that I have to create. So I absolutely am feeling that right now. I feel like I'm in this like safety cocoon of the Monday schedule. And I'm happy for that because the last week has just been so much stuff coming up. Like I do feel relatively rooted. Maybe that's a little bit of a lie. I do feel like I'm doing okay, but I also feel like a lot of stuff is coming up for me. And I would venture to say it probably is something that you're probably going through in some ways too. I mean, we all go through things in our life, right? Things ebb and flow. It's a constant, balance between being in the valley and finding peaks and whatnot. And so in that way, it's no different. But I also know that astrologically, there's some pretty big conjunctions happening with different planets, and it's putting a lot of pressure and tension into the world right now. So I know I'm feeling affected. I know a lot of people in my life are also feeling it. So I imagine that you are too. And I always find this so interesting because there's so many ways that we can be affected. Sometimes we go through things where the world around us is putting that pressure onto us. This could be like, you're living your life and you lose your job, or you get some new news, something that you weren't expecting. It could be happening in your relationship. So it's happening to other people, but it's affecting you by proxy. Or, you can kind of be going through what I feel like I'm going through, which is just stuff is just coming up from inside of me. Everything around me feels, relatively the same as it has been, but I don't feel like I'm the same as I have been. And I feel like there are opportunities in my life for me to really exercise who do I want to be and having to make those decisions. And I was thinking about this a lot last night because I was chatting with a friend who had had a really difficult set of interactions the night before. And of course, without sharing all the details, there was a confrontation and then a second confrontation, and she was able to really hold a firm boundary. And we were talking about how on the outside, you can set a boundary and you can be really firm, but on the inside, it's causing such a significant amount of stress, and your body feels like it's going into fight or flight, and your heart is beating out of your chest, and you don't feel okay because going through confrontations can be so anxiety producing. And I was thinking specifically about how that choice to go through that, to say, I'm learning how to work through my anxiety. I'm learning to hold a boundary firm instead of collapsing into what other people want from me or what I feel like the situation wants from me, but actually being able to hold firm and understanding why you are showing up the way you are. All of this is such deep personal work, and it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of intention setting. Because at first, when we are learning to change the way that we enter a conversation or we change the way we approach something, we have a muscle memory, physically, emotionally, mentally, of how we're going to get through that interaction. So when you've been a people pleaser a lot of your life, your natural reaction, your muscle memory is going to be to default to that people pleaser because it seems less stressful, it's less confrontational, you're going to make other people happy. There's, physical changes that are happening in your body that make you choose that path. And as you start to become more aware or enlightened, whatever word you want to choose, and you start to realize, I need to make a change in my life because I am being hurt by what I'm going through. I want to do things differently. It takes so much more conscious effort because the muscle memory is still something different. And so you can't do that just automatically, right? You can't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to set boundaries moving forward, and then just do it without thinking. You can say, I'm ready to set boundaries moving forward. And I'm ready because it's going to probably kick my ass a little bit in the process. And, I was thinking so much about this with her, but I was thinking about this in relation to my own life because I am trying to work through so much of my own anxiety. And it's so frustrating sometimes, you guys, because I did so much therapy in my 20s. I spent like 9 years in therapy. And then I kind of had a little break and now I'm back in therapy. I'm 35 now. So I had like a 6-year break. I did try some therapists out in 2020 and into some parts of 2021. But it's different when you find a therapist to work with long term. And part of the reason I wanted to find a therapist now is because I feel like I'm at a new phase in my life where I'm ready to deal on a deeper level with a lot more of the underlying stuff, the reasons why I have different kinds of anxiety that is going on now than I had in my 20s. And I do feel like this is a good conversation to be had because I don't know about you, but I've spent a lot of my life looking at my personal growth as though there was an end point. And I wasn't doing this consciously, but it is very true from looking at how I've been. I thought, if I just learn to do things the right way, and I'm just thinking now, this might have a lot to do with growing up in a very Christian environment. But I really did think, if I just learn to do things the right way, if I'm just a good person and I just make everybody happy, and I just, if I go to college and I get a, education, and then I get a job, and then I'll have a husband, and then I'll have a family, and then I'll just do all of the right things, and then there will be like this end point that like you just achieve perfection. Like there's a right way to do it. It doesn't make sense now that I'm in my 30s and I've lived a lot more life. But I do think that people have this idea. I'm going to go to therapy and then I'm just going to get better. And then when I'm better, then everything's just going to be fine. And what I'm starting to realize is that does not exist. There is no end point to our life. There's no approach with our, honestly, with our health that is just do this and you will be perfect. Because things are always going to be able to be introduced. For example, you could be in perfect physical health and then have a parasite introduced to your body and then become really sick and not know why you're sick and go down that hill, and then you're going to have to recover from it, right? Same thing can happen with our emotional or mental or even spiritual health as well. You can be doing all of the right things to maintain that, and something can come out of left field that can change where you're at. And instead of trying to fix ourselves or fix the problem, maybe it's more about learning how to work with what is and how to love ourselves through whatever we are experiencing and whatever we are going through. So more on that here in just a few minutes. But first, I'd love to share a little bit more of what is happening astrologically with our Astro Check-In. I mentioned earlier that there are some forces happening astrologically that are creating a little bit of havoc in our lives. And that is thanks to a couple of different planets and where they are and the relationship they have with each other in this moment. It starts with the Sun in Leo, which is, of course, a very fun and creative time for many of us, opposing Saturn in Aquarius, which has been there for almost 2 years now. We're used to Saturn in Aquarius, but right now, as the Sun is in Leo, these two are opposite of each other, especially over this next week. They're almost in an exact opposition. And this is just creating a little bit of a tension between the Sun and Saturn. It's not bad, it's just happening. But what's kind of wreaking a little bit of extra havoc is that in another fixed sign, so Leo is a fixed sign, Aquarius is a fixed sign. In the fixed sign of Taurus, there's this conjunction, so several planets really close together, and that is Mars and Uranus and the North Node. Now, I know a lot of people are like, okay, Felicia, you're starting to lose me when you're talking about nodes and things like that. Basically, what you need to know is that these 3 placements in these 3 different fixed signs are creating a ton of tension and volatility. It's almost like they're the dramatic ones right now because they're each fighting for the energy and attention to go in a certain direction. And it's almost like you can picture yourself like, okay, here I am, I'm trying to make a decision moving forward, and then you've got all of these competing voices that are shouting at you. Some people in that, position are just going to break down and not be able to listen to anything. Sometimes one is going to make a lot more sense and you're going to go in a certain direction. Sometimes it's going to create such a force that you're going to get fed up and you're going to do something that you didn't normally do. And then other times, some sort of outside force might actually come in and do something to demand you to listen to it. And that is going to be another source of change in your life. And all of this is kind of building. It's going to stay in this T-square all the way through the full moon. And the full moon is part of this T-square because it's part of the opposition between the sun and the moon. And also the moon is super close to Saturn. So there's just a ton of the planets having this big conversation right now and putting pressure on us. Now, if you are not directly feeling that pressure right now, that is okay. You're not doing it wrong. It just means that there's other forces working in your life right now. And so that's totally okay. But you might just be aware of it and kind of be aware of that this could be a possibility as you kind of move through the world. You might be hearing some crazy news from other people. You might have friends that are going through major breakups. You might have people changing jobs. You might just feel like there is change in the air. And there is. And the last thing that I want you to feel is any kind of fear. This is not meant to be like a fear-mongering or to worry you or anything like that. So please do not feel worried. What I want you to remember more than anything is that the full moon, including this full moon, T-square and all, is a time of illumination. It is a time of fulfillment, of harvesting, of seeing the big picture, of letting go. All of these things. So this full moon, I want you to just see, where are the themes coming up for you? Is it in Aquarius? If you're feeling some Aquarius vibes, you might be feeling a lot of new ideas. You might be feeling a little rebellious. You might be feeling really pulled towards social causes. You might be really in tune with your intuition in a way that's like just knowing things. Or maybe you're feeling a little bit more of the Leo energy right now. Leo energy can sometimes be very romantic, can be very much showing off, it can be very creative, a lot more like self-interest, like what's happening for me personally. Or you might also be feeling some of that tension from Taurus, where some of those other planets are. So in Taurus, there's this feeling of needing security, of holding on to your valuables, of finding stability within your life, and also finding safety in having things. And that doesn't have to be all material possessions. It could also be like having your routine, going out into the garden, talking with the bees, like something like that. So just notice. And as you move through this week, as we move towards the full moon, my suggestion is to focus on letting go of what you can't control. It's kind of like we're going to be really owning our surrender this week. And through the Patreon page, I have this lunar self-care guide, which does have a full moon ritual in it for this month in particular. And this month, it's all about kind of owning, like, let it come and let it go. Let it come and let it go. And so if that helps you, wonderful. If you have the full moon guide, check that ritual out. Or if there's some kind of personal ritual that you want to do at this full moon that's about surrendering, that's about letting change come into your life, and to remember that the universe, and this is a personal position that I have, but it's one that I think is really helpful. The universe is always conspiring for your highest good. So just open your heart up and just let yourself get moved in the direction that you're supposed to move for your highest good. Be patient right now. Don't feel a lot of pressure to have to act right now. I do not suggest, big manifestation practices at this point. Like if there's something very specific that you're working on, you can always manifest or set intentions for yourself at any time. But I do think that it's probably a little bit of a more favorable choice to just let things kind of fall into place and then work from there, because you don't want to be doing double work, right? So just to reiterate, lots going on, nothing to be afraid of, but definitely plenty to kind of put your hands up, open your eyes, and just say, I'm just watching, observing all of this, taking note of what matters, what's coming up, and seeing where everything falls into place. Now, with all of that said, I think it's probably a good time for a quick break. So the main thing that I wanted to share with everybody this week were a few ways to remember to take care of yourself and to allow yourself to find peace, especially in the times when you are not feeling that. And like I've said several times this podcast, I do think there's a lot up for everyone right now. And it is kind of like back to school season and things are changing and life is changing and the days are starting to get shorter. And I do feel like this is that time of year where we start to pick up on a lot more anxiety. And part of that comes to trying to pack more in and continuing to pack more and more in when we need to probably start letting some stuff go. And honestly, this is the first thing that I personally come back to when I start to get into an anxious spiral. Where can I let go? Do I need to find some space in my physical schedule? And it doesn't have to be because you can't handle what's on your radar. It could be because you need more mental space to handle what's happening inside of yourself. And that is something that I never, ever, ever, ever used to make space for. I used to always hold myself to this degree of if I was capable of handling something, then I needed to put it on my back and carry it, which led me to pushing through things so much, being literally so weighed down by the amount of stress I had on my back and on my shoulders, and literally not having an outlet for any of it. And I repeated this cycle so much where I would just get so stressed out, and then I would just say, well, now I just have to suffer like this until these things end, and then I can have some relief, only to when those things would end, that I'd start to do the cycle all over again. And now I realize that there's just some things that I need in my life, and a little bit of a slower pace and more space is necessary. And we forget this. And I really feel called to share this right now because I know so many people out there who are just like that. Like maybe it's you. Maybe you're feeling this exact same way, where you feel like if you wanted to take some time that was just for you, that would be selfish, that would be a bad decision, that would mean that you're not a good person, that you should sacrifice what you need for the greater good of somebody else. And yes, sometimes this might even be people that you love. Like you might want to or feel the need to do whatever makes your partner happy. And so you do all of those things, and yet your needs aren't being met. And so I ask you, are your needs being met? And if they're not, what are some of those things that need to be a priority for you right now? And this is hard. If you're anything like me, I struggle with knowing what I want and what I need. And knowing that about myself now, it means that I have to work on really consciously and moving with intention, being focused on that. What do I need? What do I want? How can I make that decision? And what I've been doing is I just start with what I know. And a lot of times recently, it's been like, I need structure. So if I have a client who doesn't text me back for a week, I can't hold their spot for them because I need structure. I deserve to move through life where I know what to expect in a week. And even though it is so uncomfortable for me to text that client and say, hey, you never got back to me and I'm so sorry, I can no longer get you in this week. In the past, I would have thought, Felicia, that is just so terrible. How could you not be understanding of them? They should, be given a break. It's not that much for you to, not have a safe schedule. It's just be flexible. But how crazy is that I would be more willing to go down that rabbit hole instead of saying, no, it's not too much to ask, especially professionally, but honestly, in general, for somebody to get back to you in a timely manner when it has to do with your time and your service. It's not that much to ask. And you're not holding it against them. You're not saying they're a bad person, but you are saying that it will no longer work for you. And that's a boundary. And this comes back to this whole thing that I'm talking about, is that as you start to come to these places where you realize these things, then you have to be willing to get uncomfortable. You have to be willing to get uncomfortable holding that boundary and saying, I don't feel good doing this right now, but I know that it needs to become my new muscle memory. And maybe someday, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe sooner, when something like that comes up, I won't struggle with it so much. I won't feel as uncomfortable because I've shown myself that I can do it. And I gave myself whatever the outcome was. Like for me, I gave myself respect for my own schedule and my own time. And I gave myself what I needed, which was structure. I need to be able to count on what I'm facing in a week. I need to know what's ahead of me. And that is not an unreasonable need or request. It is totally okay to feel that way and to ask for that from anybody. Now, of course, you're going to have places in your life where it's going to be kind of like your entrance to these conversations. And this is, I think, the part that I kind of alluded to earlier is like, I feel like I did a lot of this work in my 20s in certain situations. And now here I am having to face some of the harder ones. For me, like the past 8 years, a lot of the boundary setting that I had to learn, and it's been honestly, like when I look back on it, it's such a tricky path. Like a lot of it has come from my business. Some of it came from clients, like who's a good match and who's not a good match. How do I vet that? How do I let people go? And I've had to learn some really hard lessons with that. Sometimes it's the people that I work with. Some people I've worked with and it's like, I thought I had like a lifetime bond with them, and turns out like we couldn't even get through a really challenging feedback conversation. And I learned the hard way on that. Other times I've learned that there are people who are fantastic, but they're just not a good match for my business. And so I've had to let certain people go. Some of that's been like a hard conversation. Some of it has just been life circumstances. Like they go in one direction when I go in another, and that works out great too. But I have always had to think about that whenever I'm evaluating any of these things, because it all comes back to relationships, right? Relationships with clients, relationships with photographers. I've had to think about how I am showing up for that conversation. And am I putting my whole self forward? Am I sacrificing what my business needs for the comfort of somebody else? I cannot do that. I cannot do that. And so I won't do it. And so I've had a lot of practice. And now at this point, 8-10 years later, it's a lot more comfortable than it used to be. Now I feel like I'm getting into this new area of life where I need to learn how to show up for myself in a new way. And one of those areas that I'm really struggling with personally is working through my anxiety in a healthy way. Because for so many years, I coped with anxiety by doing things. It goes back to what I was just saying. Okay, I'm going to make myself not anxious by making sure everybody else is good. When everybody else is good, then I'm good and I can feel good. And it's this vicious cycle. Now that I am not interested in doing that, I have uncovered all of this anxiety within me that I have to learn how to release and let go and move through, and not just cope with, because I guess cope in that sense means like putting a Band-Aid on it. Like that's what I used to do. I would just put a Band-Aid on it so that I didn't feel it and I didn't hear it, because I was just either so busy or so tired or making other people so happy that I didn't have to listen to those voices. Now I have to start to work through the anxiety piece. And working through anxiety is really freaking hard. If you have ever struggled with anxiety on small levels or huge levels, you know this, that anxiety is no small thing. And, I am not a therapist. I don't know if you could tell by how I talk about all of this. I'm definitely not a therapist, but I am a person who is trying to figure it out. And so I will share with you a couple of the things that recently I've been trying to help myself manage my anxiety. The first one is not relying on anybody else to make me feel better. And this is really hard because when we feel anxious, like what I want to do is go get comfort from somebody else. I want to go to Dave and have him reassure me. I want to call my mom and have her reassure me. I want to, do something. I want to get that validation from somebody else because that's the easiest. But that said, have you ever noticed that sometimes when you do that, if you don't get the exact response that you want, that it actually makes it worse? It makes you more mad or more sad or more anxious to feel like somebody else isn't getting it or doesn't understand, or maybe they dismiss it, like they're moving through their lives. They're not maybe totally understanding what you're feeling inside. So you don't get it from other people. You have to learn to validate it for yourself. Another thing that I've been doing when I feel anxious is cry. I let myself cry. I just let myself have that release, because there is a release and you can find relief through having the tears flow. And of course, I can't make myself cry, but I've just noticed when it really starts to bubble up, instead of pushing it down, I let it come up and I let myself cry. And it's uncomfortable and I feel like I need to fix it, but I've been working on accepting that. Like, I'm having an emotion, I'm going to let it move through me, let it come out. And that it doesn't have to just be crying, right? Like, sometimes there are plenty of other ways to find a release and to let emotions come out. You could journal. You could get in your car and you could scream your head off. You can punch a pillow, you can go on a run. There are many ways that you can channel an emotion, but you do have to do it consciously, right? You have to understand what's coming up, and the point is just to let it come up. And again, instead of directing it at somebody, instead of picking a fight, or instead of I guess picking a fight is the best word. Instead of picking a fight, you let yourself deal with it on your own. I'm feeling this right now. I'm finding a release for this feeling. I'm acknowledging how I feel. And the last piece here is that I've been asking myself, is this something I can change, or is this something that I cannot control? And maybe that just is for now. Hey, I need to deal with this at some point, but actually dealing with it today is not going to be the best day. Honestly, that is something that I've been having to do a lot over this past month. When I have these feelings come up, I've just been asking myself, is this something that has to be solved right now? Because a lot of time our anxiety makes us feel that way. I need to solve this right now so that I'm not anxious anymore. Not because I want to actually find a solution, but because I don't want to feel anxious anymore. And so I've been really trying to say, okay, this is happening for me right now, and this is important. And even though it's making me anxious, I do not need to solve it today. I can see how this plays out. I can get more information. I can see how I feel over the next few days. I can give myself more space to process this. And then I can create a plan. It's hard to do, but that one has been really helpful. And then along those same lines, asking, is this something I can control or not control? I can also realize, like, if my reaction or if my anxiety has to do with something that I absolutely cannot control, I learned to find acceptance faster. Now, this is such a silly example, but it is a real example, and it's one that you might relate to. Yesterday around 4:30, I realized, I'm like, listen, it's a Sunday. We need to get to Costco. And I mentioned to Dave, like, hey, like, we should go to Costco. We need to get this, this, and this, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't really say anything. And so I was like, okay, well, what's going on for me? Like, I'm tired. I know he's tired. I feel like he doesn't want to go to Costco, but I really want him to go to Costco with me. Like, I just want to spend some time with him. And I was like, I'm going to go and say what I need. And even though I'm uncomfortable with, like, really asking for it, I'm afraid of rejection, like, I'm just going to go ask for it. So I get downstairs and I'm like, hey, I would really like it if you'd go to Costco with me. And he was just like, I'm just really too tired. And to be honest with you, I got so mad and frustrated and anxious and all of the feelings because, again, this was it was uncomfortable for me to ask, and I was feeling anxious. So what I did is, instead of lashing out or picking a fight or accusing him or trying to get my way, I just took a deep breath and I walked out of the house and I went to Costco. And I was sitting at a stop sign and I realized, I'm like, you can't control this. Like, you cannot make somebody want to go to Costco with you. You can't make somebody prioritize that. You can't make somebody else take on things that they're not going to take on. You just can't do that. And so that kind of acceptance in that moment, I cannot control this. Honestly, it took a little bit of a weight off. I will not say it didn't make me mad, because I definitely stewed about it like the entire Costco trip and on the way home. But ultimately, like, I felt really proud that I was able to work through what I was feeling and allow myself to feel it and allow myself to think about it in a productive way. As funny as that is, and as strange as this is to share, like, it's a sign of kind of like what I'm talking about with like the internal changes. In the past, I would have thought that that is something that I need to talk to Dave about because I need him to do something differently. Like, and that's me trying to control the situation. Hey, if I ask you to go to Costco with me, I need you to want to go to Costco with me. Is that a reasonable thing to ask of somebody else? I mean, yes and no, right? Like, because it's such a simple thing. Like, hey, and on one aspect, it's like, hey, sometimes when we do errands and like we get stuff done for the house, like, I just want a companion and I want to share that with somebody else. And I want that from you. Is that okay for me to ask for that from him? Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, is it a reasonable expectation that somebody should always feel ready and like jumping at the bit to go to Costco with you? No, probably not. And one of the things I've also been working on is like accepting people for who they are. If Dave was like a super romantic person, maybe that is something that I could get from him. Like, I'm sure, and I know I see them all the time online. There are some partners out there who are like that, who are like, I'll go to Costco with you. I'll go to Costco I'll do all that. That is not the person that I've chosen to be with. Dave does a lot of things, but if he is too tired to do something, that he's going to tell me the honest truth. And there's a lot that I appreciate about him and who he is, and I have to accept him for who he is. And that's true of all relationships in our life. We have to accept the people around us for who they are, and we need to understand that we cannot change people. We cannot change other people, but we can control ourselves, and we can control how we move through things. Sometimes we cannot control our emotions. And when we try to, we sometimes, like I said, we stuff down, or we try to manipulate things so that we're less uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, we have to choose how we want to move forward and why. This is why it always comes back to living with intention. For me, I want to get to the bottom of some of this anxiety and create new pathways in my life for moving through life, so that I don't have this underlying anxiety and continue to manifest the same exact situations over and over that I have to continue to work through. I'm ready to get to the bottom of it. And so getting to the bottom of it is more important to me than fighting with my partner about whether he's going to come to Costco with me or not. Getting to the bottom of it means that I am going to be willing to understand that there's going to be stuff that I'm going to work through that's going to make me uncomfortable, that's going to bring up feelings of rejection inside of me. There's going to be clients that I have to set boundaries with, that it makes me wonder if I'm a bad person, and have to validate myself and tell myself that what I'm asking for is reasonable and it is okay. All of this matters right now. And I hope that sharing this helps you as well. Either helps you find some different ways to deal with some of the stuff that has been coming up for you right now, or maybe gives you a little bit of encouragement that you can start down that path as well, getting to the bottom of some of your stuff, or at least gives you that confidence and that affirmation that the path that you're on, it's not always going to be comfortable, but it is okay. It is not dangerous to be uncomfortable. It's an opportunity for us to figure something new out for ourselves. So with all of that said, I think that it is a good place to wrap up today's episode. Let's end with a card drawing and see what the universe wants to say about this conversation. I'm going to grab the Wild Unknown Animal Spirit deck. Haven't used this one in a little while, so let's shuffle this deck and see what comes up. This card is the Black Egg. I've never gotten this card before. It is a spirit element. Each of these cards has like a different element, like there are earth element, animals, water element, and then there's a couple of special cards that are like spirit element. So let's see what it says. Black Egg. The black egg contains one of life's essential treasures, the truth. Inside of it resides no confusion, excuses, small talk, noise, or lies, not even white ones. This living and breathing vessel harbors only that which rings true. When this essence is in balance, we speak slowly and clearly. We start asking questions like, what do I know to be true about myself? And what is true about the world? The energy of the black egg hovers and waits for us to reconnect. It is available at every moment, in every situation. It is the epicenter of truth, the birthplace of our voice. So interesting. I kind of love this idea that there is this vessel, this holding truth that we can connect to at any moment. And I do believe that. It all connects to what I'm saying. When we decide we want to live in the world authentically, we have to accept that it's not always going to be perfect. And that in order to get there, we do need to speak up and get uncomfortable. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Fight through some of the anxiety, work through the fears, and understand that we're all just riding the wave. And with that said, there are going to be times in our life where it's too much to do that, so we're going to just do what works for us, or it's worked for us before, and we can always come back to changing things when we are ready. So, thank you for joining me today. And if you know somebody who would love today's episode, or at least love the subject of this podcast, I would love it if you would share it with them. Or if you have a chance to leave me a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, that would be so kind. I would really appreciate it. Please stay connected in the ways that feel best for you. Take care of yourself this week. Put yourself first. And I will be back with a new episode next week.